Dan, I genuinely wish the Verballers out there would have heard the conversation you and I just had about getting our bodies ready to do recreational activities, physical activities like tennis or golf or whatever. Nothing is a greater sign of the times, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. My the saved Instagram posts on my phone are just like 11 things to do every morning so you can live a life like a human being. Like this thread through back stretch, this hip loosener, this glute activator. Yeah, I'm okay. And I don't know how you're going to tie this into our like when will it happen for theme, but I'm excited to find out how you're going to tie this into like UCF hiring Ted Roof to coach their defense. But and maybe that's the analogy for the hips that need loosening, the back that needs stretching. Excited for that, but yes, we are of a certain age now, and that's what happens.
It is what happens. I fear that I too am part of the Instagram/YouTube backstretch algorithm.
Yeah, of course.
And I've got multiple of those saved to my phone. Maybe the easy way to tie it into this episode is by saying that stability is a very important thing. Stability affects you in life no matter what it is you're doing. You know, if you've been listening to this show, that we have spent a fair amount of time over the last several weeks talking through, will it ever happen for ... Penn State, Tennessee, USC, Oklahoma State, et cetera, et cetera. What we started talking about last week is we're never going to be able to get through all of these teams. Every single team out there has their own that they want to accomplish, and it varies depending on the program. We want to start talking time frames, Dan. We want to start talking time frames. We don't want to have too much overlap with teams that we've covered before. But, dude, when's it going to happen for Oregon? When's it going to happen for South Carolina? When's it going to happen for Georgia Tech? Yet, again, very different at all three of those places. But we've got 5 teams that we're going to discuss here today. You and I put in a fair amount of research. This is like us dipping our toes in the waters of team previews. It isn't a team preview, but it's inching ever so close to that. When is it going to happen for Notre Dame, for Oregon, for South Carolina, for UCF, and last but certainly not least, let's talk about
Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech, yeah.
So basically,
Ramblin' Wreck.
Yeah. What we're saying is, how long will it take, if it's going to take more time, for this program to build up their engine to be good enough to draft off of the opportunity truck?
That's right.
Right? That how long will it take for them to win games 26-23, especially when so-and-so power loses a quarterback or loses a coach or is decimated by injuries or has some sort of freak occurrence that derails a season, that this team is put together well enough and coached well enough and the culture is strong enough that they're winning that game 26-23. That, you know, when Hendon Hooker goes down, South Carolina can take advantage in that moment with an offense that's suddenly popping. And so, yeah, we're taking, this is part one of how long, or is the engine already built for this team to make it happen. And generally speaking, I think what we're saying is more universal than in the previous series we did with, you know, Kentucky and Oklahoma State, what have you. This is like bare minimum be in the November conversation for a 12 or 14 team playoff, right? Bare minimum?
Not for South Carolina.
No. I think for South
Tech.
Carolina. That's how I'm viewing it. In this 12 conversation tie, that can mean 20th in the country on November 3rd. That is not a crazy thing when you look at the double-digit win season South Carolina had, when you look at some of the upsets South Carolina has had over the years, when you look at the best of the Gamecocks. All I'm saying is top 20-ish in November. I'm not saying this year, I'm not saying next year. Maybe it's 2031. Maybe that's your answer. But, and you've done deep 6th grade quarterback research because you're thorough in that way. But that is how I'm interpreting this.
Okay, well, we will go through our 5 teams here momentarily. If you're just finding us, hello, welcome. We've had a lot of people find us over the last month or so as we've been doing these team-specific episodes. So all are welcome here in the Verballerhood.
Yeah.
Make sure you hit follow, hit subscribe, wherever it is you're consuming this podcast. That helps Dan and I out, also helps you out, such that you don't miss any of our episodes. Can't overstate that enough, excuse me. Beyond that, go to verballers.com, verballers.com. That is our Patreon. We are deep in the lab right now, working up a little scheme for this coming season.
Ooh.
Games, perks, you name it. Get in on the ground floor. You get the bonus episodes every Thursday. You get the ad-free episodes that kind of go alongside these public episodes that do have the ads in them. If you're interested in any of those perks, verballers.com. Go on our Discord, chat with Verballers. It's a smashing good time here. It's starting to heat up now. As we've turned the calendar into June. Things are starting to roll downhill, as I've been teasing here for the last few months now. So get in now at verballers.com.
Yes, agree. Okay. Do you have a sound that you want to play? I'm putting you on the spot here.
I don't have anything. Do you got anything at the ready?
I don't know. This is my catch-all sound. Shout out Sibelius, who always appreciates our Okay, where are we going? Where do you want to start?
Well, why don't we start with South Carolina, actually?
Okay.
Because you brought them up. Now, I think you and I have a difference of opinion as for what it constitutes here for South Carolina. You are saying it for all of these teams is being in the November conversation for the playoff.
Yeah.
I think Notre Dame, who we're going to talk about, I think Oregon, who we're going to talk about.
November, not September, but yeah.
I think all of those teams are, like, by default going to be in that conversation. So we can discuss that when we get to some of the bigger dogs as part of this episode. But South Carolina, for me, it is winning eight regular season games. And I don't know if that puts them in a November conversation or not, but winning 8 regular season games to me seems like it's a pretty big plateau, a pretty big mountain to climb for the Gamecocks, given the current state of affairs. Is that fair to you? Is that a fair for the purposes of our conversation here?
Yeah, in South Carolina, it should be mentioned, broader context, they were one of those teams in the SEC East that are kind of losing out by the SEC changing its schedule mechanics, in the same way that some of those Big Ten West schools probably had a window close in some ways, with some of the recent down years of schools like Vanderbilt, Florida, Tennessee with down years. Not super recently, but closely enough in the rearview mirror. And that's changing. That's very much changing. And so South Carolina, to get to 8 wins, it's a different context now. And you also have to add in they play Clemson every year. And that's the reality. They play Clemson every year.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we have had this conversation about South Carolina with the schedule, though, for the last couple of years running. And I don't think you're wrong to point out that maybe they are knocked a little bit because of the new scheduling mechanic, but their schedule has been a murderer's row for, I feel like, as long as we've talked about South Carolina.
Sure.
It's never been easy. This season, if you just want to take that as an example, they've got 7 teams on the schedule projected to be inside the top 25, and 4 of them are on the road. That is not going to be easy, especially for a team that struggled with, frankly, both lines last year. The defense was kind of a wreck. New quarterback this year. You can't just rely on Spencer Rattler to make a play. Lenoris Sellers, maybe we can talk a little bit about him. But there's a lot to like on this team, I think, with the way that Shane Beamer is building it. But that schedule is sort of like a brick wall.
Yeah.
And how you get past that, what it's going to take to get the program to a point where it can reliably get to 8 wins or be part of that late season conversation. I'm not sure I fully understand what that path looks like at this point, because the SEC has gotten harder in a second because of the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, and obviously the scheduling thing that you mentioned earlier. So do you have any ideas on that front as for what it will take and when it will happen?
Okay, so step 1, if we're talking about some kind of short-term solution, is wrap your offensive line in bubble wrap, because completely beat up last year, and it was such a huge difference maker. Spencer Rattler constantly running for his life. I think I saw they played 3 left tackles, maybe 3 right tackles. Like, they were just all over the place in terms of a patchwork offensive line. And this isn't an SEC commentary like you need to win in the trench. You need to win in the trenches everywhere. This is more, you'll never win with an offensive line like South Carolina was having to put on the field last year because of catastrophic bad luck. And so the good news for South Carolina in the short term is the universe tends to even things out. If you are just crushed by injuries one year in a position group, you're likely not going to be crushed the next year. That's unless there's something behind the scenes with the strength and conditioning program. I don't have the kind of resources to cultivate sources in that department. So if you're going to say, okay, South Carolina is going to get better along the offensive line because they have to. They've had some big-time recruiting wins on both sides of the ball. Nick Harbor a couple years ago. I think it's Dylan Stewart, the big 5-star edge rusher, coming in this year. And Shane Beamer should be able to string together top 25-ish classes year over year over year, which in the best-case scenario, you're finishing top 25-ish with stringing together top 25-ish classes, despite how difficult their newer schedules are going to be. So the path forward is solidify the lines. I think they're going to constantly be able to find playmakers, smaller playmakers, secondary guys, receivers, running backs. I think it's about Rocket Sanders coming in this year.
Yep.
But losing Juice Wells to Ole Miss, Xavier Leggett to the NFL, Trey Knox. But Shane Beamer is going to have to be the most charming, charismatic portal quarterback recruiter over these next 2 or 3 years. Because right now, all due respect to Davis Beville and Robbie Ashford, it appears to be a big gaping hole on the roster post Spencer Rattler. And even with Spencer Rattler, it wasn't always super pretty. Oh, not always his fault, for sure. So Shane Beamer needs to be the most charismatic portal quarterback whisperer, whatever. And they're going to have to be able to hire. I don't see it. I think there's too many things. Like, I don't love Dole Loggins, whatever, however you pronounce it, at offensive coordinator. They look lost late in games. I don't think his offense is especially fun. And so it's not a will it happen. When will it happen? I think bare minimum, if it's winning 8 games, if it's being in that November, like ranked number 19 on November 6th or something, bare minimum 2026, probably.
Okay.
Just because the quarterback is sort of NA at this moment, right?
Well, Lenore Sellers is the guy.
He
the guy. He appears to be the guy. And I really like him. I went back. I was looking at his high school stats. His high school stats, I mean, all these guys who started college, their high school stats are pinball numbers. But his in particular were incredible. Had something like 45 touchdowns through the air, 22 on the ground. He can run. He can throw. Based on what he showed in the spring, which, again, you take with a grain of salt, a lot of it was very promising. So I really like him. You mentioned Nick Harbor. Nick Harbor, by the way, may run in Paris as part of the U.S. Olympic team, or at least he's going to try out to be part of the Olympic team.
He made the trials, I believe. Yeah.
He made the trials. Shane Beamer fully supports it. Acknowledges, yes, it might hurt on the football side a little bit, but talk about a dude, man. 6'4", 240, a wide receiver who can run like a gazelle. That is a weapon for you. So if nothing more, South Carolina gives you some interesting ammo to play with on your video game dynasty, if that's a direction you should choose to go.
Sure.
Here is the thing with South Carolina, and I think you touched on a lot of the points. South Carolina, mostly under Shane Beamer, has recruited at like that top 20 level. They've been very active in the portal. They've also been a pain in the ass under Shane Beamer. That's a pretty good starting point. And I think we can look at Shane Beamer last season aside. We can say, based on where the program was when he took it over, he has overperformed. I remember year 1. I remember year 2. I remember our conversations after those seasons saying, you know, we looked at South Carolina's schedule going into the year. We didn't see them doing as well as they did. We're not talking like they're beating the brakes off of teams way better than them, but they have played hard each and every week. They've had roster issues to deal with. You mentioned the injuries, but by and large, this team, I think, in my opinion, has performed very, very well, overperformed to some extent in the time that Shane Beamer has been there.
Overperformed?
Overperformed.
Have they hit? Is he at 500 in SEC play?
The first season of Shane Beamer, Dan, we thought they were going to be like a 2-10 team, and they won 7 games.
I know, but we're just wrong all the time. That's not the bar necessarily.
Nobody saw that. Nobody saw that.
That's true.
So I think, in my opinion, you can yell at me if you want.
Yeah.
But I think he has done a good job with that program. Right now, they're the kind of team that can catch you if you're not paying attention. They're not the kind of team that you can rely on beating teams better than them. And that's kind of that next step. We got to get to a point with South Carolina where reliably they're a team that you can factor into some of those games. And it's not just, oh, so-and-so was on a letdown week or wasn't paying attention or it was a rivalry and South Carolina caught them.
Right.
The fact that they have been to 2 bowls now in 3 seasons pretty much without a functioning offensive line is
Yeah.
something else. It's something else. Last year, it was all on Spencer Rattler, and they couldn't run the ball at all. The offense relied a lot on him to make plays. This offseason, they went out. They got Rocket Sanders, who you mentioned, from Arkansas. There seems to be some signs they're going to try and recommit to the running game and try harder to fix some things up front and achieve more balance. But they're not going anywhere against the schedule. Unless the trenches get resolved, unless they solve the trenches in a hurry, which I don't expect, they're not going anywhere against the schedule. I do appreciate the fact, though, that they're trying to be a little bit more balanced. They've recognized many of the same patterns in the statistics that you and I have.
Yeah.
They recognize they can't just put it all on a new quarterback, Lenora Sellers, whoever it ends up being. The defense, I would also point out, has also trended in the wrong direction the last 2 seasons. So it's this constant push-pull with South Carolina where they've been very aggressive via the portal. They brought in a lot that can help this team. They've also lost a fair amount via the portal over the last couple of years. The recruiting, I think, by and large, has been pretty good. Getting to that next stage against this schedule is a riddle that I do not know how to solve. I don't think it's going to happen this year with a new quarterback. I agree. I don't think it's going to happen next year either. Until we see some real momentum in the trenches to make this thing better as a whole, not just one or two guys, 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, I mean,
best case scenario, I think you're right. This is not me rooting against South Carolina because I really like Shane Beamer. I really like what he is doing there. And I love talking about this team week in and week out because they are kind of that wild card team that scares the crap out of you.
Mm-hmm.
But as for getting to a point of reliably 8 wins, reliably being a team that's like only a 6.5 point dog against better opponents, it's going to take a minute, man. I don't know.
I mean, you're right. They had one of the worst pass rushes in America last year, I believe. Like, blitzing getting home never happened. You saw, I mean, look, it was all self-contained in the end of the Florida game last year when they come after Graham Mertz on, was it 4th and 10 when he threw the ball up to Ricky Pearsall, which basically that play cost them. It was that and like a tipped ball, like a freak play for Florida. That play cost them a bowl bid last year, along with Spencer Rattler sort of arm punting on 1st and 10 with under a minute left and getting picked off. It sort of encapsulated everything, that it was just a sort of lost team on both sides of the ball because of injury, because of a number of reasons, talent. And the reason I'm a little bit concerned is you're getting further away from some of the leftover pieces from the Will Muschamp era. And so this is fully Shane Beamer's team. And it's a little bit, I mean, in a lot of ways, a lot different with the portal era that, you know, you're repopulating a team quickly and you're not relying on the previous guy's roster. But just in terms of the consistency and evidence that things are trending in the right direction as a whole, like, I don't know how you see it with South Carolina as their schedule gets tougher. And look at their, I mean, do you have the schedule in front of you for this season?
Yeah, I was looking at it earlier.
Week after week after week.
It's 7 teams projected to be in the top 25, 4 of which are on the road. I mean, there are very few breaks in this schedule. You start off with, I mean, listen, I'll read it through real quick.
And they have one of the most, I think, an underrated home field advantage at Williams-Brice. I think it's a great atmosphere. Yeah.
Open the year with Old Dominion. Next week at Kentucky. Next week, home against LSU. Week after that, home game against Akron before a bye. And this is when it really rolls downhill.
Yeah.
That's not an easy September.
No.
After that, Ole Miss at home, at Alabama, at Oklahoma, 3 weeks in a row before another bye. That's a tough stretch. And then they close out the season home against Texas A&M, at Vanderbilt, Missouri at home, home against Wofford, at Clemson. So every other week there, the final 5 weeks of the season, you've got a really tough opponent, including that Clemson rivalry game, the Palmetto Bowl, at home to close out the year, final week of November. I don't know. Barring all of those other teams falling apart, I don't see how it happens in the short terms, the immediate short term in 2024.
Yeah, it's sort of a question right now with South Carolina. It's what does the third best player at any given position group look like? Yeah. Because they've had the star power, right? They've had star power at any and all positions. I think it was Javon Kinlaw along the defensive line a few years ago. You know, the best of Spencer Rattler, you know, going back, you know, Steven Garcia, whoever. Best of, you know, wide receivers. Like, they've had all conference players at any and all position groups. But to me, it's the, like, again, what does the third best guy on that defensive line look like? What does the third best corner look like, playing the slot? And that's where the fall off is between teams like South Carolina and then LSU, Georgia, Alabama, whoever. And when they're able to recruit that kind of, it's not even depth, but just like across the board talent, then we're having that November conversation. And they can't seem to piece it all together at the same time. It'll go in a really fun direction if they can figure quarterback out, because, again, I think the offensive line's going to be better these next couple of seasons. I think they're going to get better on the edge and getting after the quarterback, but you're capping their ceiling when, again, maybe Lenora Sellers is really strong, but the future doesn't seem obviously bright on offense now.
I would agree with that. All right. Speaking of obviously bright, let's talk about your Oregon Ducks.
Okay.
I have as my it here reaching the Final Four.
Yeah.
Reaching the Final Four.
It's this year. This year is the when. Yeah, absolutely.
Dan Lanning is on every list. Whenever they put out these coaching lists, best coaches in college football, these listicles, right? Dan Lanning's on every one of those lists, one of the top 10 best coaches in college football. Oregon is sort of the envy of many programs and fan bases around college football because of how aggressive they've been, both in the portal with NIL. The recruiting is very strong. The schedule this season on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being hardest, 6.5, I'd say. Maybe you disagree with that, but it seems like it works out pretty well for a team that has as much back as Oregon. The two questions for you about Oregon capturing that it this year, one micro, one bigger. The first is, what happens if Dylan Gabriel goes down? Like, I'm not trying to trot the black cat out here or anything, all right? I like Dylan Gabriel. We did a show, 3 months ago where I said Dylan Gabriel's the best quarterback in college football this year, given the circumstances. But smaller dude, injury history. Mm-hmm. Hypothetically speaking, if that happens, what does it look like? Is it Dante Moore? Who is next up? And is there any confidence there?
It's Dante Moore to the point where during spring, I think players were going out of their way to say, like, this guy's different, right? That, like, the conversation wasn't fully there's a quarterback competition, but that there are two starters on this team at Dante Moore's best.
Well, that's good for Dante Moore, right?
That's very good for Dante Moore, and the luxury of being able to sort of sit and develop and learn the playbook and, process everything. And in a place that he was committed to go to as a high school senior anyway. So it seems ideal that he doesn't have a ton of pressure on him right now. But yes, you're right. Dylan Gabriel does have that injury history. There were some road concerns, losing to Oklahoma State, the end of the Kansas game last year. Like, I think he's very, very good. And opportunistically, like, he's in a great place, given the receivers, given, both tackles coming back, a lot of experience on the inside of that offensive line. The running game should be strong and healthier than it was last year with Noah Whittington coming back. The defense should offer him plenty in terms of opportunity. Continue, Ty.
So let me pause you right there, okay?
Please.
Because I want to get your full Oregon thoughts here. But my bigger, more macro question is about Dan Lanning.
Okay.
Is this guy a big game coach? Is he a big game? Like, I'm not trying to be a takesman here.
Yeah.
I like Dan Lanning a lot. I see him on all these lists. Alabama wanted him, right? Allegedly. 3 losses in 2 years to Washington. He lost the rivalry game in year 1 against Oregon State his first season. Got run off the field against Georgia in his first game, which, that's unfortunately a commonality when he played Georgia. So I'm not necessarily holding that against him, but I do think that it's a fair question to ask. This guy gets much acclaim. I think a lot of it's deserved, but winning the big one, getting to that big game, getting Oregon in position to, achieve something on the national level. Is Dan Lanning that guy? Is there something wrong with his approach in the previous instances he's had against Washington? Like, where do we stand with Lanning as, like, the dude?
Okay, so a couple things. Washington just put a ton of players into the NFL, including, surprisingly, Michael Penix in the top 10.
Number 9, yeah.
They weren't outclassed against Washington. I think they lost all those games by 3 points, maybe, I think.
Yep.
Had opportunities to win, and were winning late in all of those games. So, in his defense, he was not outclassed. To hold it against him is to also say, you can pinpoint specific moments that Dan Lanning was perhaps too aggressive before the half at Washington and Seattle. I don't really hold it against him in the 2022 season when Bo Nix got hurt at the end of that game when they were in position to score. And so that was a freak occurrence, which, again, a slightly more seasoned coach than Dan Lanning in that moment perhaps is up a little bit more or is very quick to say, do not run the ball here, Bo Lanning, and take that hit, whatever it is. And there's only so much you can do. It's tackle football, Ty. So they're in a position to win that game. They're in a position, they come back and win the Pac-12. They're in a position to come back and win the Pac-12 championship game after starting terribly. I think there's a lot of optimism internally and at Oregon that those are sort of teachable learning moments that will be figured out, and it'll be much easier to figure out given the depth of talent on the Oregon roster, that those moments probably won't be happening. They won't be happening against Washington this year. And they have Ohio State at home. They have Michigan and Wisconsin on the road. But all things considered, it's a pretty good opening year Big Ten schedule. And that even if they lose to Ohio State in Eugene, the thought is that they won't finish worse than 10-2 with this roster and this, the experience and ceiling. So I think it's fair to say he needs to nail those 4th and short decisions or kick or don't kick, whatever type decisions. But they're in a sort of luxurious place that, that's the difference between them and a team who went to the national championship last year.
By the way, again, I'm not trying to be a takesman.
No, it's okay. I'm here for it.
I'm not rooting against Oregon. I mean, I root for Oregon as much as the next guy now, if only just
Well, you like when they lose because more people listen to the show.
Well, more people listen to the show, but I root for them on your account.
Yeah.
This, I don't know if you could see this on the video.
Oh, you're financially now.
Yeah, I'm now financially committed, which isn't good for you.
I know.
It's probably not in focus, but
no, it's okay.
My $10 bet for Oregon to win the national championship at 12-1, which I put in months ago at this point.
Yeah.
I love Oregon this year. I love them.
Yeah.
I love everything about them. I know that there are other teams that have gotten many of the headlines here in the offseason, but it just feels like Oregon is comically loaded.
Yeah.
Along the defensive line, certainly with talent, skill talent on offense. I think the schedule is, as I said earlier, kind of favorable to the Ducks, especially going into like a new conference.
Mm-hmm.
It's set up for them in a way that you could only dream about if you're an Oregon fan.
Yeah.
And so I think this is the immediate window for them to get to that Final Four. I've already got them in pencil in my playoff.
Sure.
I think they start the season obviously as a top 5 caliber team. And I think that's going to continue throughout the course of the year. They've got the big game midseason against Ohio State. That game is in Autzen. And it's one of those deals where as long as they don't get blown out, it's not really going to hurt their playoff chances. It's one of those games that is going to be the showpiece for the weekend, I'm sure. And provided it's a close game, it'll tell us a lot about how both those teams are going to fare on the national stage when they do get to the playoffs, because I think both will.
I would go as far as saying that given the college football landscape at the top right now, if Oregon doesn't win a playoff game this year, I guess with the caveat that, like, if it's not, Georgia in their first game, or if it's not Ohio State or something like that.
Sure.
If it's anybody other than Georgia or Ohio State this year, and Oregon does not win a playoff game, forget making the playoff, I would say it's a failure of a season. Unless you were talking about, Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore going down, or both tackles going down, like short of injury.
A catastrophe, right?
Yeah,
catastrophe.
Short of just bad injury luck, everything's pointing to this year for Oregon. They addressed the secondary, which, again, they were beat up in the secondary against Washington. Washington did what great teams do and take advantage, but they were trotting out 4th and 5th corners at times last year. And so if we're assuming reasonable health, everybody has injuries, Oregon not winning a playoff game this year is a failure. Yeah.
Dan, I want to talk about Ty's dark horse du jour in the Big 12.
Okay. Who's the current favorite in the Big 12, by the way?
Probably Kansas State. I'd have to check.
Okay.
I'll check while we're talking. It is not this team, I can tell you that much.
Okay.
UCF. I am...
UCF. Okay. Plus 1,200 as of May 27th to win the conference. I have it in front of me.
I have an unhealthy obsession with UCF this year.
Okay.
And with the program as a whole, I think it's in a really good spot. So for context, 6-7 last year, made a bowl in their first year, in the Big 12, hit the portal pretty hard. Per the 24/7 rankings, they're second in the conference behind only Colorado. Colorado, by the way, had 42 transfers that they took, which is a ridiculous number. UCF at 27. So they've been hitting it pretty hard. That includes KJ Jefferson. You remember him from Arkansas. The linebacking core this year almost completely rebuilt with transfers. They've got to get better against the run this season, so it's not a surprise that they went out and they hit that side of the ball pretty hard via the portal.
I don't think they stocked it with a bunch of defensive linemen, though, did they?
They didn't stock with a bunch of defensive linemen.
The portal,
they went hard at linebacker.
Yes.
Which I think they saw as like one of their areas of need. Obviously, they have like 40 linebackers this year, something like that. I think it is playoff qualification for UCF. I think that is the next thing. I know they're in a new conference. I would expect that I might hear some pushback from folks who would say, well, the it's got to be just getting into the conversation for the conference.
Mm-hmm.
Getting into the conversation for the Big 12. That wouldn't you start there? I am aiming a little bit higher with this team because the Big 12 is a total crapshoot right now. There is no obvious alpha in the Big 12. We can talk about the likes of Utah and K-State and Oklahoma State and Arizona. It's like all of those teams have flaws. There's not an obvious Ohio State or Oregon or Alabama situation.
I think Utah at its peak seems to be pretty accomplished, as does Kansas State. Yeah.
At its peak, but none of those teams are beyond the brain fart game.
Okay, that's true.
They just aren't. And so UCF to me is very interesting. They're very interesting. They're over under 7.5 this year. Their two toughest games against Arizona and Utah, both at home later in the year. They don't play Oklahoma State, Kansas, or Texas Tech. 4 teams that, have offense, can knock off pretty much anybody in the conference. To quote the great Cosmo Kramer, Dan, you don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle.
That's true.
And I'm seeing a lot of sizzle on this team. A lot of sizzle. This is not a John Rice Plumlee situation at quarterback anymore.
Who, by the way, was fine.
He was fine. He was
pretty good. Yeah.
He was. But I think KJ Jefferson, the best of KJ Jefferson, is better. And I really like the combination of KJ Jefferson and RJ Harvey in the backfield. That gives me notes. Sure. I'm not saying it's like for like.
Yeah.
Gives me notes of what Gus liked to run at Auburn. Right? You've got those two dynamic guys in the backfield that you can do stuff with. So I'm really interested to see what goes on, especially in the Big 12 now that both Texas and Oklahoma are out. Because, again, there is no obvious alpha.
Yeah.
There isn't. There are good teams that we know about that aren't really sneaking up on anybody. But I think it's there for the taking. And so I'm interested in UCF this year. Notice I did not talk about defense and Ted Roof. I did not. If you want to talk about that, you can. I didn't want to bring this conversation down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm choosing to make that my blind spot. But at least with respect to what they've done in the portal, with some of the talent I know they've got on offense, if nothing more this season, they will be a very, very good offense that is very difficult to defend.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop.
Okay. Couple things that are standing in UCF's way, and I absolutely think the ceiling in general, maybe not this year, but in general speaking, especially if Gus is going to get a KJ Jefferson type every so often, where, the ceiling is huge, but can be inconsistent if he's not in a great situation. And, we talk about, KJ Jefferson, Rocket Sanders, pretty good backfield. Didn't work out last year. Line wasn't there. Line should be, I think, better at UCF. It's defense. It's all defense, and it's all so they gack the Oklahoma game, historic gack against Baylor last year. Am I missing another close loss? Texas Tech, I want to say. They lose by 1. And so does UCF have a fourth quarter roster to win games they should be winning, or win games that they're in position to win late? And Gus Malzahn is, as far as I can tell, is he the most accomplished coach in the Big 12 by going to a national championship, winning one as a coordinator, number of big wins at Auburn?
Kyle Whittingham's the other obvious candidate.
Yeah. Do you have any Kyle Whittingham playoff memories?
I mean, there are so many.
BCS championship memories. Yeah.
So many to go on. Yeah.
So I think the accomplishment is a little bit higher with Gus Malzahn at his best, and all of the criticisms are valid as well, given some of the offensive predictability in some of those Auburn years. But yeah, when will it happen? I think if they continue to progress, make a change of defensive coordinator tonight after we're done recording this show.
Man, what is this Ted Roof thing? Ted Roof has to have pictures of somebody that he keeps getting these jobs. He just has to. I don't know how he keeps getting work.
I mean, you can look at UCF last season and you can just say, like, if they haven't like a slightly below average time defending the run, they're winning 2.5 more games, whatever. Like, they're in a position to improve for sure. If they can protect KJ Jefferson, you didn't mention Kobe Hudson, who returns, who I think was a near 1,000-yard receiver.
Yeah.
Was it Javon Baker was the one who went for 1,100 plus yards? He's gone. But there's a lot to like about UCF's ceiling. I still think they're probably tracking behind Cam Rising in Utah. Cam Rising, potential 8th year of eligibility next year, by the way. Given the ruling. Maybe he's going to hang around to play with his son, like LeBron. I have no idea if Cam Rising even has a son, but let's assume Cammy Rising, like Bronny James, is Cam Rising's son, and he's 14. I think the best of Utah, the best of Kansas State right now. There's firepower all over the conference with Arizona's offense, with Kansas's offense. I'm sure I'm leaving other teams out, but UCF is uniquely positioned given the geography, given Gus Malzahn, given ability to attract quarterbacks or improve and develop quarterbacks that, and stringing together top 20-ish, top 25-ish classes, no less, that plus 1,200 feels a bit right. They're like 6th or 7th right now in terms of 2024 title favorites, but I would be disappointed if I were a UCF fan. UCF fan. I'm terrified of calling them USF. I would be disappointed if I don't win this conference by 2026-7, something in there.
I think that's fair. I mean, we talked earlier before we hit record about the situation that Gus Malzahn finds himself in now.
Schedule's tough this year, by the way.
Schedule
tough-ish,
is
maybe
tough-ish.
Like, I think there's just, it's deep in quality.
It's deep in quality. Again, the toughest games I think are at home, but there are landmines here. There are landmines here, and this is not a finished product. I don't want to pretend as if it is.
Right.
Certainly, if the Ted Roof defense, is the Ted Roof defense this year, that schedule will be made much harder because Ted Roof doesn't really play defense, despite the fact that he keeps getting work.
Yep.
That's kind of the X factor for this. But I do think that the timeline to be in that playoff conversation, which by extension also means a conference conversation because of how this whole thing is set up, I do think that it's a pretty tight time window for them to get there. Like, I don't think it's far off. I don't know if it's this year. I like them this year. I don't know if it's this year that they're in that conversation. That might be a bit too soon. But
okay, I
think within the next 5 years, for sure, playoff conference, absolutely. This program's in a good spot.
Yeah, they could start 1-3 this year, by the way, if the defense doesn't get figured out. If they're not tackling sideline to sideline with, I think it's at Florida, Colorado, at TCU after Sam Houston to start the season. Like, defense is still a pretty major question. We'll see with the transfers. I'm always willing to allow some leeway for transfers figuring it out, and maybe it takes a couple games to really feel confident in a new place. But UCF certainly, to me, still has the ceiling because of what you can do with that roster.
All right, we got 2 teams left here, Dan.
Yes.
Why don't we do Georgia Tech?
Okay.
Georgia Tech, I've got the it being 8 regular season wins.
Okay.
Are you still holding firm on your November conference conversation?
Yes.
As the it?
When are we having the Georgia Tech? Like, ooh, this is weird. Georgia Tech, 7-2.
They're a little like South Carolina, aren't they? A little like South Carolina. From the scheduling standpoint, the schedule's always like a murderer's row. They've got the rivalry game at the end of the season, much like South Carolina's got Clemson. Georgia Tech's got Georgia, clean old-fashioned hate. So that doesn't help. It feels also like the teams around them in the ACC are improving. Whether it's Florida State or Clemson, who have been good for, a while now, obviously in Clemson's case, but Miami's improving. Louisville took a big step forward last year. NC State, kind of a big unknown, but a lot of excitement around that program. Yeah. We talked about them a few weeks ago. Virginia Tech, maybe even Syracuse with Fran Brown. They're recruiting really well right now. Tech is also, much like South Carolina, one of these pain-in-the-ass teams.
I agree.
They're pain in the ass. They play hard for Brent Key. They had close losses last year. They could have been better than they were from a win-loss standpoint. I think they're closer to that 8-win number than South Carolina, if only because the ACC is not the SEC. And I think that they've done a little bit more to balance out that team. Huge jump forward last year on offense. Defense has struggled.
Yeah.
97th nationally last season. They allowed close to 30 points a game. Got to resolve that. If they're not going to improve on defense, at a minimum, they're going to need more playmakers on offense so they can keep pace in shootouts.
Mm-hmm.
Also, even if they can improve marginally on defense, they're still going to need those playmakers. Can't rely on Haynes King for everything. They're still going to need more skill talent that can help them be a little bit better on offense. So I feel optimistic about the state of this program. I think they're doing a good job. I like the fact that they showed real fight last season, and they have since Brent Key got there. I mean, since he was named kind of the head dude, they have played really hard for this guy. And it feels like it's been a slow, gradual build, but they are up against that schedule. They are up against all the challenges built in with recruiting to Georgia Tech, which is not the easiest place to recruit to. Proximity to talent is good. A couple like warring factions here on the Georgia Tech side that stand in their way of, I think, reliably getting to that 8-win plateau. How do you feel?
Something else standing in their way, Bowling Green State University, Ty. You lose last year to Bowling Green. You rely on Mario Cristobal absolutely barfing up a game to get to a bowl game. Let's try to provide as much Georgia Tech context as possible here.
I'm trying to
win the bowl game.
Mr.
They won the bowl game
here
by a couple touchdowns, I believe, against UCF, fellow team on this episode.
That's right.
But that is some of what the 2023 season entailed. Cristobal barfing and a loss to Bowling Green.
The Cristobal barf is going to go down in infamy, man.
Yeah.
That was incredible.
So, did you see, by the way, that the college football 25 game, like, it gives you a, like, when it's mathematically impossible for the other, you can kneel and it just plays it out for you. And
great.
Everybody was joking. Miami doesn't have. I think I saw Bud Elliott.
Miami doesn't have.
It's not applicable to when you play as Miami.
Yeah, Bud went with that one. That was pretty good.
So, Georgia Tech's schedule, like, there's, again, deep in quality this year. And this is not a 2024 preview per se, but you're just like, you mentioned the Georgia thing. It's Florida State and Dublin. And then whatever you think of first-year Syracuse, games on the road against Louisville, Duke, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Miami, NC State, Georgia to finish out the year. Like, Georgia Tech needs to be noticeably better on defense. They allowed 38 to Bowling Green last year. Like, they need to be so much better. These transfers need to come through in a very big way for Georgia Tech. And I think they hired Duke's co-defensive coordinator, Tyler Santucci. I just assume JMU quarterback great. It just sounds like Tyler Santucci transferred, like he was in the Ben DiNucci trade. Santucci-DiNucci. So I'm hopeful that, because I kind of, Brent Key resonates with me a little bit. If Haynes King can throw fewer interceptions and they can figure out quarterback long term, I think they're another school that kind of needs to be in that Shane Beamer portal quarterback whisperer space. But yeah, Georgia Tech to me is a lot of catastrophe has to happen. Not that the ACC is all that stronger, and look, it might get weaker in the next few years with Clemson and Florida State and some future lawsuits. We'll see, but it's hard to see that Georgia Tech path right now to that November conversation. And if it doesn't happen this year with the experience of Haynes King, I think they're going to be squarely in that will they, won't they, Russ, Rachel, November Bowl conversation. Like, I think we're going to be like, well, Georgia Tech's 5-6 heading into the Georgia game. We'll see what happens. Or they're, 5-4, mid-November. Like, it's hard to see them breaking out of that with, as you mentioned at the top of this, like what the floor kind of looks like in the ACC right now. We'll see with Boston College. We'll see with Syracuse. We'll see with Virginia. You can pencil in some of those, and Pitt doesn't seem to be trending in the right direction at the moment. But if you get a schedule like this year's, where it's just like, well, Duke might be pretty good, right? Year one, given what's coming back, given what they were able to recruit at quarterback. Like UNC might be, like any given week, Max Johnson could look like a Heisman and could look like a high school all-star. So I'm holding out hope that Georgia Tech is somebody new to be in the ACC conversation, but I don't know. I'm going to see. I need to see like a top 50 defense from them, something like that.
The defense is problematic.
Yeah,
the defense is problematic, and again, you can't put it all on Haynes King. Haynes King's got some injury history as well.
Sure, of course. Terrible.
Which we should mention. And they need more of a supporting cast. If they're going to play shootouts, they need more skill talent to step up. If they don't want to play shootouts, they got to prove they can fix the defense. They still need the playmakers. You can't be on one guy.
14 transfers in, 32 out for Georgia Tech this past season. Again, I don't hate it. I mean, not all of these dudes were ending up at huge places after leaving Georgia Tech, so maybe there's a reason. But roster turnover, much needed improvement on one side of the ball, too many turnovers, a little bit of luck, a little bit of clearly not there yet for Georgia Tech. So I would say, how many years realistically will it take to get to 8 wins, if that is your perceived ceiling for Tech? And maybe that's, it's 7-2 in early November and in that top 20-ish conversation, but by the end of the year, after Georgia, after somebody else, they're 8-4. I think we are probably at least 2 years away, given some of these schools trending in interesting directions. So that's my case. I think they're squarely in that 5 to 7 wins right now, and until we see some more star power, until we see some like winning the close ones on their own accord, not again Mario barfing it up, I think it's 26.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be the quarterback after Haynes King.
Yeah.
And that's nothing against Haynes King. I like Haynes King. I think.
By the way, get DJU in Dublin. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
As for situational football, August 24th, Dublin, DJU, ultimate wild card. Ton of new guys for Florida State. Florida State's going to be good this year. But weird things happen on the aisle. Come on, Ty.
Ask Nebraska, man.
Yeah.
All right. Final team here is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Okay.
The It is winning a playoff game.
Agree.
What questions do you have for me about Notre Dame? Because I asked you the Oregon ones.
Sure.
What is front of mind for you about the state of this program in the immediate future, the foreseeable future, in terms of getting to that plateau?
Better than Marshall. Yay? Nay? Are we at that point? Confident?
Should be.
Okay, good.
I'm confident. Yes.
That's one box checked. Let me take out my rubric. Okay, so the question with Notre Dame is pop on offense and paying Mike Denbrock a ton of money. I think they got a bunch of quarterback talent. Riley Leonard as a wild card athlete / like the best of him as a passer is very dangerous. Best of him. CJ Carr, quarterback of the future. That's a check on my rubric that like they are looking like they are a team built to compete to win playoff games, perhaps plural, in the near term. Defense continues to look quite strong. The corners are, if they're not the best corner duo in the country, they're one of the best 3 or 4, probably. It's Ben Morrison is the All-American, I think, on one side.
Yep. Not to be confused with Ben Harrison.
Former President Benjamin Harrison. Right. To me, it's will they find a receiver? Will the offensive line come together? And given what the talent disparity eventually look like when Notre Dame would play Clemson, when Notre Dame would play Alabama, when Notre Dame would play Ohio State, like, do they have the depth of comparable talent, regardless of what the recruiting rankings say? Because on the field, it appeared that even with top 10 type classes that Brian Kelly would string together, for long stretches, it looked like they didn't belong. It was 41-3 against Clemson in the bowl game. It was ugly in the ACC championship game in 2020. Obviously, we know the Alabama games, plural. So is this an actual roster built to compete, or another 11-1 against Boston College, Stanford, Virginia Tech type team.
I mean, as for the playoff itself,
yeah.
if we're talking about winning a game in the playoff, this is where I think we need to reframe the conversation a bit, because more often than not, over the 4-team era, we'd see a first-round matchup against who? Alabama or Georgia or Clemson. Mm-hmm. It'd be glaringly obvious, as you mentioned.
And belonged against Georgia on the field a few years ago, like the Jake Fromm team. Yeah. Belonged on the field for sure.
Sure, but we have seen more than our fair share of instances where the talent gap was overwhelming. It was obvious if you were watching at home. If you watched throughout the year, you knew that this game was sort of a foregone conclusion. Not so much the case last year. I'm not saying last year is the best example of this, but over the decade that we had the 4-team playoff, we saw many games like that where it was just too much for the underdog to overcome. Those types of teams in this new format are either getting a first-round bye or like a home game against Tulane.
Yeah.
And also in this format, because Notre Dame can't get the first-round bye, they're not in a conference, right? We know how that works. We can detail how that works at some point in July. That talent disparity should not exist against whoever they're going to end up playing in the first round. That is not to say they will win those games. But I'm saying if all goes according to the plan, Notre Dame's not going to be playing Alabama. Notre Dame's not going to be playing Ohio State in round 1 of the playoff. They shouldn't. And so if that talent disparity comes into play, maybe it's down the line. Maybe it's in the final 8, the final 4. But in terms of winning a playoff game, this is my way of saying they really don't have an excuse. They don't have an excuse. They've got a ton of talent. The recruiting has remained very, very strong.
If they don't make the playoff this year, is it a failure?
Big time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So. Because of the roster, because of the schedule.
Yeah.
The absolute floor for Notre Dame this year should be 8-4. And that's if Riley Leonard rolls his ankle and they're starting Steve Angeli or Kenny Minchie or the CJ Carr, the true freshman. That's everybody getting hurt, contracting the bird flu on top of it. 8-4. That's how you get to 8-4. The reality for Notre Dame this season, and why I think the time frame for when this will happen needs to be this year. Notre Dame's toughest game is probably first week of the season on the road at Texas A&M. The big ones the rest of the way are Louisville at home, Florida State at home, and USC on the road to close out the year. They should be better than all those teams, Dan.
I agree.
They should be better than all of those teams. There's no way they're losing all 4. They shouldn't, barring any kind of catastrophe. Notre Dame should have every opportunity to achieve that quote-unquote it. In December of this year, year of our Lord 2024, this should be that time horizon for them.
Do you think they're overrated in the top 5-ish conversation right now that we're talking about them?
Yes, I do. I saw Ari tweeted some stuff out. I see people putting out their preseason, hype rankings, their engagement farming, whatever it is.
Yeah.
No, I don't think they're the top 5. I don't. I think they're top 10 comfortably.
Okay.
But I'm not comfortable putting up that high. And it's because of the line. My biggest question
Big Joe Alt off to L.A., yeah.
Well, it's not just Joe Alt. It's Blake Fisher. They lose both their tackles this season. And the one kind of common thread throughout, I think, spring practice and much of what I've been able to read from, Pete Sampson and Brian Driscoll and all the guys that cover Notre Dame intimately, much more so than you and I, they've got a ton of talent. They've recruited very, very well along the line, but they're all very inexperienced. There's a lot of inexperience. So case in point, their new starting left tackle has one career start. Highly recruited.
Yeah.
I think is going to be fine. True sophomore, one career start. That makes it harder. On the other side, filling in for Blake Fisher, looks like it's going to be Tosh Baker, who's a fifth-year guy. When he gets beat, he tends to get beat very badly.
Yeah.
But most of the time, he's pretty good. And so that's the type of conversation we're having as opposed to what was last year the case where, you're just going to hand the ball off to Audric Estime.
Right.
You're going to try and beat people's brains in with your offensive line. And that worked to, I think, a pretty good extent. It became predictable. And I'm hopeful that this season, because of Riley Leonard, because of, talent out wide that I found very promising, at least in the context of spring football, that there's going to be a little bit more balance in how they constitute this thing this year. But, they really don't have that many excuses. They've got to fix the line. They certainly need to have some playmakers step up out wide, but I think they have better options this season than they've had the last couple of years running. And so if it doesn't happen this year, there is an outstanding question of, will it happen at all for Marcus Freeman?
If it doesn't happen this year, is Marcus Freeman Notre Dame's coach next year?
I think it depends on the manner in which it doesn't happen.
Okay, so
if there's an 8-4 situation, then maybe we talk. If it's 10-2, they get to the playoff and they lose a close game, he's still the coach because they're recruiting at such a high level. They're recruiting right now at a ridiculous level. They still have the top class in 2025. Likely that will change by the time the dust settles. Yeah. We know how this works. But the recruiting has been incredibly strong on the Notre Dame side of things, and I don't think they want to interrupt that as long as there seemingly is progress from year to year. And it might happen this year because of, new coach running the offense, new quarterback, some new talent coming out wide. Like we may see a big enough step forward on those sides that even if they don't win that playoff game, it still provides enough of a proof of concept. Like, yes, it's taking a minute. Every fan wants it to go quicker, but it seems as if they're building towards something great.
Do you consider Marcus Freeman to be an asset or liability on Saturdays? I guess that's a different way of me asking the Dan Lanning question to you because they ran out of gas against Louisville. They needed every second to beat Duke on the road, which, by the way, subplot after that last year's game, say, hey, next year it's going to be Riley Leonard and Notre Dame against Mike Elko. And Texas A&M.
Game one on the road,
So that's a fun little sidebar. But given Marcus Freeman on Saturdays, given Marcus Freeman and his hiring thus far, I think Al Golden has seemed to pretty much work out on defense. But 3 offensive coordinators in 3 years, now paying $2 million plus to Mike Denbrock. I think that's the number. It's like that's the rumor.
2.1.
Some ugly close games, ugly losses. The Clemson game, offense looking like it's a mess most of that game. Where's your confidence in Marcus Freeman as like a spearhead for Notre Dame right now?
Well, I think
other than the recruiting, recruiting's good.
Other than the recruiting's strong. Yeah, I think he's learning on the job. And I think he very much still has the confidence of the team. There's no reason he shouldn't at this point. I think his moves, by hook or by crook, to get Jared Parker out of there and bring in Mike Denbrock, I think that was savvy. Mm-hmm. This is not me saying that I am totally sold that Mike Denbrock is suddenly now a wizard after a previous stint with Notre Dame in which he very much wasn't. But I understand that there are circumstances across the board that we'll get a better look at Mike Denbrock this year to see what he's truly made of when he's calling the shots.
Yeah, it's also Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, and Kyron Lacey and Jaden Daniels are not walking through that door.
They're not walking through that door.
Yeah.
But I think for sure Denbrock's a big upgrade over what they had.
I agree.
How confident am I in Freeman? I am much more confident now than I was in year one. I feel like he has gotten better. I feel like some of the stuff that has plagued him is so well publicized at this point. Some of his mismanagement, like what we saw in the Ohio State game last year, like some of those little things I think have taken time to work out. But I feel like he is getting better as a coach. And I'm hopeful that by putting people around him that have veteran experience, getting rid of the Jared Parker thing, which last year never really synced up and always felt like it was in conflict with the line and their blocking schemes. And there was something very out of sync on offense. And I think that had an unfortunate effect and kind of cascaded down throughout the team. I'm glad that they moved on there. I think moving on there will make him better as a coach. I think there's enough talent here that this is the year. This is the year to go to the playoff and win. So
who's in Notre Dame's tier right now nationally? If you're saying in your mind 5 is overrated, they should be in top 10-ish, I would assume is where your brain is right now. So are they in the Texas tier, or is Texas a tier above? Mizzou, or is Mizzou a tier above? Oklahoma? The version of Michigan we expect this year, which is mostly still good? What tier were they?
I think they're a notch above Penn State.
Okay.
And I would say a notch below a team like a Texas.
Okay.
They're
who's in your first tier?
They're like the 7th or 8th best team in the country.
Okay. So who's that first tier? Is it Georgia, Ohio State only, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Oregon? Like, who is in that tier?
It's Georgia, it's Ohio State, it's Oregon. It's, probably Texas on the back end of that.
Okay.
Teams like that.
Okay. So they're on the next tier with like Bama, Oklahoma in somewhere like there?
I might go a notch above Oklahoma.
Yeah, Oklahoma's got a lot of questions with Jackson
I would still
Arnold.
put Bama probably in that top 5 as well.
Okay.
But they might be kind of on an LSU level.
Okay.
Ish. LSU had more talent last year, but
big defensive questions for LSU. Yeah.
Kind of in that back half of the top 10 type of tier.
I think that's reasonable. Okay. So when will it happen? It will happen this year.
It should happen in December. If
it's going to happen, it should happen.
It should happen like December 20th or whenever the first round of the playoffs are this year.
Yeah.
That's when it should happen. That's when it should happen. And I think they'll have every opportunity. The schedule is quite favorable. I read it off.
Yep.
Like, if they are not getting to the playoff this year,
we're having a different conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. But they should be 11-1.
Okay.
10-2 at worst.
Fair enough.
What do you think? Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, my rubric is quarterback and defense. Riley Leonard has had 2 surgeries since the middle of last year or something like that. Ankle's the issue, I think.
Yep.
He does not have to be a pinpoint passer. He does not have to be a Heisman caliber passer. He just has to be in the conversation of some of the best quarterbacks in the nation. If offensive line continues to develop, they should be able to run the ball. They should be able to develop receivers. Tight end is in a good place. Quarterback and defense. Against this schedule, if they win 9 games with assumed reasonable health, I think that's a failure. Yeah.
Buy your Jeremiah Love stock now, Notre Dame's running back.
Okay.
Because if you look at, as we do, returning production numbers, a big chunk of that production that walks out the door is Audric Estime. Got drafted by the Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
But they need a new alpha to step up. They just had an injury. Jabron Payne's down for the year with an ACL that he hurt in the spring. And so, they've got Shadarian Price, who's still there. But Jeremiah Love's the one who's got the wiggle, man.
Okay.
He's my dude. So I think the combo, and they're going to rotate guys in. It's not just going to be one guy, I would assume. But the combo of Riley Leonard, who can use his legs and is a pretty good passer, might not be a pinpoint accurate passer, but it's pretty good. The reason that everybody wanted him.
Yeah.
The combo of him in the backfield with Jeremiah Love, hopefully with some new receiver talent that I think most Notre Dame fans are encouraged to read about this spring. There's a lot good there. There's a lot right there if the line can get itself together and avoid any huge mismatches.
Yeah.
Should be December.
All right. You heard it here first.
Should be.
All right, you probably
we'll
heard
know
it
a lot more
40th.
by December.
Yeah. We'll know a lot more by December, he says. Yeah.
That's right.
All right.
So we've got 5 more teams that we're going to do in the part 2 of this conversation on the Thursday episode. We're going to go through Auburn, Ole Miss, Wisconsin, Utah, and Virginia Tech on our next episode. That is coming up later this week. We're also going to put a call out on Patreon. We're going to put a call out across literally every social media post or platform, whatever it is, that allows us to post it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do a mega 2-part June mailbag next week. So think up those questions. We'll post it in all the relevant spots. We want to add you to our conversation.
Solidverbal@gmail.com.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, of course.
Very dramatic. Stay tuned to the social media platforms as well, where you can post and
text Ty.
We'll answer our favorite questions. Do not text Ty.
Send Ty a text. Be cordial. Be polite.
You can text our reverb line,
Wait at the front door of every Wegmans you can find in Eastern Pennsylvania.
855 verbal 3.
Oh, yeah.
Is the phone number. So if people want to call in and leave a voice message with a question, or if they want to text in, I can check that as well.
All right. Any recommended stretch? Bring it full circle, Ty. What's been working for you?
I've been doing a ballerina stretch.
Tell me what that is.
I'm showing it for the camera right now, but it's one of those deals where you stand up, you cross your legs, You put your hand on one hip, and then you kind of just lean.
Like you're a little teapot a little bit. Yeah.
A little bit of a teapot, short and stout.
Yeah.
But you're not pouring. You're going in the other direction. Yeah. You're kind of pushing the hip out. I've been using that to stretch what I believe is called a QL or QT muscle, something in your back on the side of the spine. And that's really hampered the golf game. I've been trying to set up a golf match with our friend Richard Johnson.
He's ducking you.
Zone. No, he's not ducking
That's
me.
What I
he's
heard.
had stuff go on where he's been busy the last couple of weeks. And so we're trying to schedule a golf round somewhere in Jersey. So if anybody's got any like Central North Jersey golf course recommendations, hit us up and let me know. But I've been trying to get this back in order so that I don't embarrass myself when I go out there. And last week, I think I finally turned a corner with this.
Glute bridges, Ty. Got to hit those glute bridges. Due in large part
to my ballerina stretch. Yeah.
Glute.
I haven't done the glute bridge yet.
Oh, my God. The lower back. Take it from me. Local podcaster, Dan Rubenstein. Hips and glutes and hammies.
Yeah.
Hit that chain correctly. Yeah.
Got to activate the glutes.
Yeah, of course.
All right, listen, we're going to do this again on our next episode. It was fun to go through and do some more advanced research on teams that we're going to preview in about a month or so. More to come on that front. Send in your comments. Send in your questions. As always with the Verballerhood, we know you guys. We love you guys. We appreciate your feedback. Hit us up. Let us know what your thoughts are, okay?
Yeah.
For that guy over there, Dan Rubenstein. Myself, Ty Hillenbrandt. Talk to y'all on Thursday. In the meantime, stay solid.
Peace.